I've hosted countless family dinners in my life, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, but that evening was different. From the moment I woke up that morning, I felt it deep in my bones. Something was about to change. I didn't know it yet, but that night would become the line between who I used to be and who I was meant to become. I set the table the way I always did. Polished silverware, candles, the faint scent of rosemary and baked bread drifting through the house. My daughter Mara arrived first, as she always did. She carried a basket of fresh salad and a soft smile that warmed me like sunlight. She kissed my cheek and asked if I needed help, but I waved her off. "I've been running this kitchen longer than you've been alive," I said, laughing. She laughed too, but there was concern in her eyes, the same concern she always had when the subject of her brother came up. "Are they coming?" she asked, though we both already knew the answer. They said they'd be here by 7. It was nearly 8 when the doorbell finally rang. Mara and I exchanged a look before I went to answer it. Adrian stood there in a tailored navy suit, his hair slicked back, a faint scent of expensive cologne clinging to him like armor. Beside him, Leona glowed in a red dress that probably cost more than I made in a month back when I started my bakery. She wore her beauty like a weapon, polished, deliberate, and sharp enough to cut. "Mother!" Leona exclaimed with a sugar-sweet smile. "So sorry we're late. The traffic was horrendous." I glanced out the window. The street was quiet. "It's fine," I said simply, stepping aside to let them in. Adrian kissed my cheek without warmth. His eyes scanned the dining table, the house, everything. He had that calculating look again, the same one he used to have when he was a teenager asking for money to go on trips he never earned. We all sat down to dinner, and for a brief moment, I let myself believe it would be civil. We talked about the bakery, about Mara's upcoming project at work, and about the new cafe I'd just opened downtown. Leona complimented the food 3 times in that overly rehearsed way people do when they're preparing to pivot to something uncomfortable. I noticed Mara's fork still as she sensed it coming. I did too. Then Adrian leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. "Mom," he began casually, the way a man does when he already assumes he'll get his way. "Leona and I have been working on something big. Huge, actually. A real opportunity to change everything." Leona's eyes sparkled like she was about to unveil the secret to eternal youth. "That's wonderful," I said mildly. "What kind of opportunity?" He smiled, but it wasn't genuine. It was the kind of smile people wear when they think they're talking down to you. "A real estate project," he said. "Leona's cousin's husband has this connection, a property downtown, prime location. We just need a little help to get started." I placed my napkin on the table, my pulse steady. "How much is a little help?" He didn't hesitate. 200,000. Mara choked on her water. "Excuse me," she said, wiping her mouth. Adrian frowned at her, as though she'd interrupted an important business call. "It's an investment. We'll double it within a year. Mom has that kind of money sitting around anyway." My chest tightened, not from the number, but from the tone. That entitlement, that quiet assumption that my savings, my work, my life sacrifices were all just extensions of his convenience. "I see," I said slowly. "And what would this investment be exactly?" Leona leaned forward, her red nails gleaming under the candlelight. "It's not just a business deal, Mom. It's about family. You've always said you wanted to see us thrive. This is your chance to help us build our future." Mara shifted uncomfortably. I could see her jaw tighten. "Adrian," she said quietly, "you're talking about a lot of money. Are you sure this is?" He cut her off. "Stay out of it, Mara. You wouldn't understand." That was it, that tone again. The one that turned my stomach. The one he used on me whenever I hesitated to say yes. I glanced at him. My son, the boy I raised alone after his father left, the boy I worked double shifts for, the boy who never once asked me if I was tired. He smiled confidently, waiting for the inevitable yes. But something in me refused this time. Something in me finally stood up after decades of bending. "No," I said simply. At first, it was like the air had been sucked out of the room. Even the sound of the clock ticking seemed to stop. Adrian blinked, sure he'd misheard me. "What?" I met his eyes. I said no. Leona's smile flickered. "You're joking, right?" "No, I'm not." I reached for my water and took a sip, my voice calm. I'm not giving you $200,000. For a moment, no one moved. Then Adrian laughed, an ugly, disbelieving laugh. Mom, come on. You've always helped me. You gave Mara a down payment for her house. I gave Mara a small loan, I said. And she paid me back every cent. You've been helped more times than I can count. His eyes darkened. So that's what this is about? Keeping score. No, I said quietly. It's about boundaries. Leona leaned back, crossing her arms. This doesn't make sense. You've been generous your whole life. Why change now? Because, I said, setting my glass down, being generous to the wrong people isn't kindness. It's self-destruction. Mara's eyes glistened. She didn't say a word, but her expression said everything. Adrian's voice grew sharp. You're choosing money over family. The words hit like shards of glass, not because they were true, but because I'd heard them before. Years ago, when he'd demanded his tuition paid after flunking out of college, he said the same thing. When he asked for a new car because the old one wasn't good enough, he said it again. Each time I gave in. Each time, I chipped away a little more of myself. But not this time. I stood up slowly. Family doesn't blackmail love with guilt, Adrian. And money doesn't define love. He slammed his hand on the table. You've changed. No, I said evenly. For the first time, I'm staying the same. He looked stunned, as though he couldn't process a version of me that didn't bow to his demands. Leona reached for his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. I watched them both, the picture of entitlement, polished and hollow. I thought about all the times I'd bailed him out, all the sacrifices I'd made thinking I was doing what a good mother should. But all I'd really done was teach him to take without gratitude. The silence stretched long and heavy. Finally, Adrian stood, his voice trembling with anger. Fine. Keep your money. But don't expect me to come running when you're old and need help. I didn't flinch. You haven't come running in years, Adrian. Leona shot me a glare sharp enough to cut through glass. You'll regret this, she hissed. Maybe, I said softly. But at least I'll regret it on my own terms. They stormed out, the echo of the front door slamming lingering in the air. For a long while, I just stood there. The candles flickered, their flames dancing in the aftermath. Mara came up beside me and wrapped her arms around me. You did the right thing, she whispered. I exhaled, my chest heavy but strangely light at the same time. It shouldn't feel this hard to protect what you've built, I murmured. She squeezed my hand. That's because you've been building for everyone else. I looked at the door one last time. The sound of their car fading down the street felt like a curtain falling on a play I'd been trapped in for decades. And as the silence settled, I realized something I'd never truly known before. Saying no didn't make me cruel. It made me free. I turned to Mara, my voice steady but firm. You know, I've spent my life mistaking peace for silence. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? I looked toward the dark window, seeing my reflection. Older, yes, but finally honest. I've let people confuse my silence for weakness, I said. But that ends tonight. And though neither of us said another word, we both knew. This wasn't just a dinner. It was the beginning of a reckoning. When I look back now, it feels like another lifetime. The woman I used to be. The version of myself that still believed love could fix everything. Before I became the woman who stood her ground at that dinner table, I was a frightened 29-year-old mother with 2 children, 1 suitcase, and a heart shattered in more ways than I could count. Adrian was 5. Mara had just turned 2. Their father, Patrick, left one morning in the middle of winter. He didn't slam doors or yell. He simply packed a bag, poured himself a cup of coffee, and told me he needed more out of life. I remember standing there in the kitchen, my hands still dusted with flour from the bread I'd been baking. I didn't even cry at first. The words just echoed in my head like an empty hallway. I need more out of life. Apparently, more meant a new woman in another city. He walked out, and I was left with 2 kids, a rent notice pinned to the door, and no plan beyond surviving the next sunrise. The first few months were chaos. I worked anywhere that would have me, cleaning houses during the day, waitressing at night. I'd come home to find Adrian asleep on the couch, clutching one of his toy cars, and Mara curled up beside him with her thumb in her mouth. There were nights I'd sit on the kitchen floor after putting them to bed, counting coins and bills that barely covered groceries. I remember once staring at a can of soup, wondering if I should save it for tomorrow or eat it to keep my strength up tonight. But I never let them see me break. Not once. The turning point came on a rainy afternoon when my boss at the diner, a kind woman named Ruth, caught me wiping tears behind the counter. She asked what was wrong, and I told her everything. How Patrick left, how I couldn't afford childcare, how I felt like a failure. She handed me a napkin to dry my face, then said, "You know how to bake, right?" I blinked, surprised. A little. My grandmother taught me when I was young. She smiled. Then start there. Bake something. Sell it. You don't need much. Just courage and flour. Those words lit something in me. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I mixed what little I had, flour, butter, sugar, and determination, and made a batch of cinnamon rolls. The next morning, I took them to Ruth's diner, and she put them on the counter. By noon, they were gone. By the end of the week, people were asking for more. And that was how it began. I started baking every night after work, sometimes until dawn. The smell of yeast and sugar became the rhythm of our lives. Adrian would sleep on the couch beside the oven, wrapped in a blanket, while Mara would toddle around, giggling as she played with measuring spoons. We lived in a cramped apartment then, peeling wallpaper, one flickering bulb in the kitchen. But it became my little kingdom. That tiny oven became my empire. After 6 months, Ruth helped me rent a stall at the weekend market. I sold pastries from an old folding table with a handwritten sign, Sweet Haven Bakery. I still remember the first time I made enough money to pay rent without worry. I held those bills in my hands and cried right there in the middle of the market. For the first time since Patrick left, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. But being a single mother wasn't a triumph. It was a constant war between exhaustion and hope. There were mornings I'd drop Adrian at school, Mara on my hip, then rush to the market, only to come home and bake again until my hands ached. My palms were always cracked, my nails broken, but my heart was steady. I told myself I was doing it for them. Every cupcake, every loaf of bread, every dollar saved. It was all for Adrian and Mara. And yet, as the years went by, I started to see how differently they grew under the same roof. Adrian was always demanding, loud, charming, stubborn. People adored him. He had that sparkle that made teachers forgive him and neighbors indulge him. When he asked for something, it sounded like a promise you couldn't say no to. Mara, on the other hand, was quiet, observant. She'd sit at the counter and help me frost cakes, humming softly, her little hands steady and careful. When Adrian turned 10, he started complaining about not having what other kids had, no big house, no fancy gadgets. I tried to explain that money didn't fall from the sky, that I was doing my best. But guilt is a powerful thing. Every time he pouted, every time he looked at me with those disappointed eyes, I'd cave. I'd buy him the shoes he wanted, the bike he didn't need, the phone he couldn't afford to lose. I told myself I was giving him what his father didn't: stability, comfort, love. But in truth, I was trying to fill the hole Patrick left in all of us. I didn't realize I was teaching Adrian something else entirely. That love came with a price tag. Mara never asked for much. She wore hand-me-downs without complaint, helped around the bakery, and learned the recipes by heart. While Adrian was out playing video games with friends, Mara stayed behind to sweep flour off the floor or count coins from the day's sales. One night, when she was about 11, I found her sitting in the back room with the cash box open, arranging the bills in neat stacks. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" I asked. She looked up, smiling shyly. "I just wanted to help you count. You always look so tired." I knelt beside her, my throat tight. "You shouldn't have to worry about that." She shrugged. "But I want to." That was Mara, quiet, kind, reliable. My anchor. Adrian was my storm. As the bakery grew, so did my exhaustion. Within 5 years, Sweet Haven had moved from a stall to a small storefront. I took out a small loan, renovated, and built a reputation for having the best cinnamon rolls in town. We weren't rich, but we were steady. For the first time in years, the fear of losing everything began to fade. But stability didn't bring peace. Adrian started high school around that time, and everything changed again. He began hanging around kids from wealthier families, children who lived in big houses and took vacations to Europe. Suddenly, our bakery smelled like work, not pride. He'd come home, drop his backpack on the counter, and say things like, "Why don't we move to a better neighborhood?" Or, "Everyone else's parents drive new cars." I tried to explain again and again that we were lucky to have what we had. But he only saw limits. One evening, he came home angry. He slammed his bedroom door, shouting, "You just don't get it. I don't want to be poor forever." The word poor stung like a slap. I stood outside his door, my apron still on, flowers streaked across my arms, and whispered, "Neither do I," but he didn't hear me. When Adrian turned 16, he asked for a car. I told him no, we couldn't afford it. He didn't speak to me for a week. Eventually, I gave in and co-signed a loan for a used car, telling myself he needed it for school. 3 months later, he crashed it. Totaled. I expected tears, remorse, gratitude that no one was hurt. Instead, he blamed me, said I should have taught him to drive better. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat in the kitchen staring at the wrecked car's photo, my hands trembling. I realized then that somewhere along the line, I'd turned my son into someone I didn't recognize. And I had done it with love. Still, I couldn't stop working for them. My bakery became my sanctuary, the one thing I could control. Every recipe was a prayer, every loaf a promise that tomorrow might be easier. When Mara finished school, she chose to study business management so she could help me. Adrian went to college, or rather, I sent him there. Paid every bill, every semester. He changed his major 3 times, never graduated, and blamed everyone but himself. By the time Mara started helping me manage the bakery full-time, I was nearing 50. My body ached, but my heart was proud, for her if not for him. Mara brought structure, innovation, and grace. She modernized our system, built an online presence, and within 2 years, we had 3 locations. I told Adrian he could join us if he wanted to learn the business, but he waved me off. "I'm not spending my life selling bread," he said, half laughing. "That's your thing." So he drifted. From one investment opportunity to another. From one get-rich-quick dream to the next. And I kept helping him. I told myself he just needed time to find his way. I didn't realize he'd stopped looking. Years later, when I sat across from him at that dinner table, the one where he demanded $200,000 like it was his birthright, I saw every mistake I'd ever made reflected in his face. All the nights I worked myself sick so he could have more. All the yes I gave when I should have said no. All the love I mistook for rescue. I built my life alone. Every brick, every crumb, every cent earned with hands that never stopped shaking. But I didn't realize until much later that I had built 2 very different children. One who knew the value of effort, and one who only knew the weight of expectation. And the saddest part? The son I tried so hard to save became the man who would one day call me selfish, for finally choosing myself. I suppose that's the irony of survival. You fight so hard to build a life that you forget to teach others how to build their own. But that lesson was coming. For all of us. Adrian was 13 when I first began to sense the shift, that subtle, poisonous tilt between gratitude and expectation. It happened so slowly. I didn't see it forming until it was too late. He had always been confident, the kind of boy who believed the world would open its doors for him simply because he knocked. I used to admire that about him. I thought confidence would protect him from the world's cruelties, from the struggles I had faced. I didn't realize that without humility, confidence curdles into entitlement. It started with small things. "Mom, everyone at school has brand-name shoes," he said one afternoon, tossing his scuffed sneakers onto the floor. "You don't want people to think we're poor, do you?" I remember pausing in the kitchen, my hands sticky with dough. "Adrian, you have perfectly good shoes." He crossed his arms, his voice dripping with disdain. Perfectly good for who? The kids who get laughed at. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone. The casual way he spoke, as though shame was a tool he could use to get his way. That night, after closing the bakery, I drove to a discount store and bought him the shoes he wanted, not because I could afford them, but because I couldn't bear the thought of him being embarrassed. I told myself it was a mother's duty to protect her child's confidence. The next morning, he barely said thank you. Mara, who was 9 at the time, stood in the doorway watching. She was still in her school uniform, clutching a small paper bag of cookies she'd helped me make. Her eyes flickered between us, between her brother's smug grin and my forced smile, and I saw the confusion there. Later that night, she asked quietly, "Why do you always buy him things when he's mean?" I froze. "Because he's just growing up," I said softly. "He doesn't mean to be unkind." But even as I said it, the words felt like lies in my mouth. The years that followed became a blur of giving in. Adrian's demands grew with his age. First the clothes, then the gadgets, then the idea of going to a better school. He came home one evening, waving a brochure for a private academy. Everyone's saying it's the best. Better teachers, better connections. I can't get anywhere from that public school. "Adrian," I said gently, "we can't afford that right now." He scoffed. "You can. You just don't want to." That stung more than I'd ever admit. He threw the brochure on the table, the same table where we used to eat pancakes and laugh on Sunday mornings. "You say you work hard for us, but when I ask for something important, you always have an excuse." I stayed silent. Silence had become my armor, the thing that kept arguments from spiraling, that kept the peace when I was too tired to fight. By the end of that month, I'd pulled every string I could and somehow got him into that private school. I told myself it was for his future. But deep down, I knew it was because I didn't want to lose him, not the way I'd lost his father. Mara didn't say much when she found out. She just smiled that quiet, practiced smile she always wore when something hurt. But one evening, as she helped me stack boxes of pastries, she said, "He's lucky." I glanced at her. "You're both lucky." She shook her head. "No, Mom. He's lucky because he doesn't even have to ask twice." The words cut deeper than she knew. Adrian thrived at that new school, or so I thought. He came home with new friends, new slang, new expectations. He began talking about status, about how people saw him. When he turned 16, he started pushing for a car. "Everyone in my class drives," he said. "It's embarrassing to have you pick me up." I told him cars were expensive. Insurance, maintenance, gas, all of it cost money. But he was relentless. "You have the bakery. You're doing fine. Stop pretending we're struggling." Mara tried to intervene once. "Adrian, maybe you should work for it. Like, part-time? Mom could use help at the shop." He rolled his eyes. "I'm not flipping muffins for pocket change." Her face fell. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat by the window and stared out at the streetlights. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered, the lines around my mouth deeper, the exhaustion in my eyes heavier. I thought of Patrick, of the day he left, how I'd promised myself that my children would never want for anything. And yet, here I was, giving Adrian everything, and he still wanted more. But guilt is a stubborn ghost. It whispers in your ear, telling you that maybe, just maybe, if you give a little more, they'll finally see your love. So I bought the car, a small used sedan, red. He smiled for the first time in months when I handed him the keys. He hugged me, quick, distracted, then took off with his friends. For a moment, watching him drive away, I felt a rush of pride. Maybe this time I thought he'd understand. But understanding was never what he learned from me. 3 weeks later, I got the call that IT was close to midnight. I just finished cleaning the bakery and was sitting on the couch, too tired to even take off my shoes. "Mrs. Hart," the voice on the line said. "This is Officer Randall. There's been an accident." My heart stopped. I raced to the intersection he mentioned. The flashing red and blue lights blurred in my vision. The car, or what was left of it, sat crumpled against a street lamp. Adrian stood off to the side, unharmed but pale, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. When he saw me, he didn't run to hug me. He didn't apologize. Instead, he said flatly, "It's not my fault. The roads were slick." I blinked, shaking. "You were speeding." "It wasn't that fast," he said defensively. "You never taught me how to handle curves like that." I stared at him, words failing me. The officer glanced at me sympathetically, then explained the ticket, the damage, the cost. I barely heard him. On the drive home, what was left of the drive, Adrian sat in silence beside me, scrolling through his phone. Not a word of apology. Not a flicker of remorse. When we got home, he went straight to his room. I stood in the hallway trembling, my hands pressed against the wall. Mara peeked out of her room, eyes wide with worry. Is he okay? I nodded numbly. He's fine. But I wasn't. That night, after they'd both gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd once eaten cookies with frosting all over his face, and let the tears fall. I didn't cry because of the car, or the money, or even his carelessness. I cried because I finally saw the truth. I had created this. My love, my constant desperate need to make up for the absence of his father, had turned into his weapon. He had learned that no matter how he behaved, no matter what he demanded, I would bend. And in bending, I had broken something inside both of us. Over the next few months, he didn't change. If anything, the crash made him bolder. He laughed it off to his friends, called it bad luck. He hinted that I should help him buy another car, this time something safer. I said no. He sulked for days, refused to help around the house, ignored me at dinner. Mara, now 15, stepped in quietly. She helped me at the bakery after school, took the bus to and from home without complaint, and pretended not to notice the distance between her brother and me. One evening, while she wiped down the counters, she said softly, "You know, Mom, sometimes people stop learning when everything is handed to them." I looked at her, startled by her wisdom. "Where did you hear that?" She smiled faintly. "Nowhere. Just feels true." I nodded, unable to speak. But truth doesn't fix what's already cracked. The more I worked, the less Adrian respected it. He stopped seeing the bakery as our family's pride. He saw it as my obsession. "Why don't you hire people to do this stuff?" he said one morning, scrolling on his phone while I kneaded dough. "You act like this bakery is the only thing that matters." "It's what keeps a roof over your head," I reminded him. He shrugged. "Still, you could relax a little. Enjoy your life. Enjoy." As if survival had been optional. I wanted to scream, to shake him and ask where the boy I raised had gone. But instead, I stayed quiet. Because silence had always been the easier road. And in that silence, Adrian learned that his words had no consequences. The final straw came the day he turned 17. He threw a birthday party at our house without asking. Loud music, strangers, drinks everywhere. I came home from a late delivery and walked into chaos. Cigarette smoke, muddy footprints, laughter echoing off the walls. I told everyone to leave. Adrian shouted that I was ruining his night. When the house finally emptied, he stood there, drunk and defiant. "You don't get it, Mom," he slurred. "You're small time. Always have been." The words hit harder than any slap. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He stormed to his room, slammed the door, and blasted music so loud the walls trembled. I sat on the stairs, my hands shaking, and finally, I broke. I cried until the morning light spilled through the curtains. Cried for the woman I used to be, for the boy I couldn't save, for the daughter who saw too much. That morning, when Mara came downstairs and saw me, she didn't ask what was wrong. She just knelt beside me and said, "You don't have to fix him, Mom." And in that moment, I realized she was right. But I didn't have the strength yet to stop trying. I still believed, foolishly, that love could cure selfishness. It would take years and a final betrayal to teach me otherwise. After that dinner, the night I finally said no, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind outside the window reminded me of Adrian's face when I refused him. That mixture of disbelief and anger, like I'd committed some unthinkable betrayal. I kept replaying it. His tone, Leona's hand tightening on his arm, that forced smile fading into venom. The words, "You've mistaken my silence for weakness," echoed louder than I'd expected. Maybe because, for the first time in my life, they were true. But as I sat there at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd once fed my children on borrowed money, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Leona. The moment she entered Adrian's life, something shifted. Subtly at first, like a breeze that slowly becomes a storm. I remember the first time I met her. Adrian had called a week earlier, voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, I've met someone. You're going to love her. She's different." Different. That word stayed with me. It always does when a man uses it like a spell, as though different means better, perfect, or exactly what I need to fix myself. They arrived for Sunday lunch, Adrian grinning wider than I'd seen in years, and beside him, Leona. She was stunning. The kind of woman who knew it too, with the confidence that came from watching heads turn. Perfectly manicured nails, perfume that filled the room before she spoke, and a voice like silk wrapped around glass. "Mrs. Hale, I've heard so much about you," she said, smiling like a practiced actress. "Your bakery, Adrian says it's legendary." Her eyes lingered on the framed photo of my shop behind me, the one from the day I'd finally bought the building outright. I thought it was admiration. I learned later it was calculation. Over lunch, Leona charmed everyone. She laughed at Adrian's jokes, praised Mara's quiet achievements, even offered to help me expand online. She was clever. She knew how to make herself seem indispensable. But I saw something that day that no one else did. When Adrian talked about his new promotion, she subtly corrected him. "It's our promotion," she said sweetly. "After all, I'm the one who made him apply." When he reached for his wallet to help with dessert, she stopped him, whispering, "Don't, baby. Your mom should treat us this time." And when Mara shared that she was saving to buy a small apartment, Leona smiled, then said, "Oh, that's cute. Adrian and I are thinking bigger. Real estate investments, maybe luxury rentals." I remember the way Mara's face fell. The way I felt something cold crawl up my spine. Leona knew how to read a room. And she read me perfectly. She saw an older woman who'd built something from nothing. She saw a son used to being adored, indulged, forgiven. And she realized all she had to do was pull the right strings. It started small. Adrian began calling less often, saying they were busy building something. When I did hear from him, it was usually about money, not outright asking, just hinting. "Mom, Leona wants to try a business idea. Just something small. You always said to dream big." Or, "We're thinking of getting a new car. It's not about showing off, it's about making the right impression." Each time I hesitated. Each time I gave in. Because that's what I'd always done. Leona would send me thank you notes. Little handwritten cards with cursive, so perfect it looked printed. "You're such a blessing, Mrs. Hale. We couldn't do this without you." At first, I believed her. I wanted to. But then there was the incident. It was a summer afternoon, hot, humid, the kind of day where icing melts too fast. I was in the bakery, trying to balance inventory sheets, when my assistant handed me my phone. "It's Adrian," she said. "He sounds upset." I answered, heart pounding. "Mom," he blurted out. "Leona's furious. She just found out you gave Mara money for her down payment." I blinked. "That's none of her business, Adrian." And Mara didn't ask, it was a gift. Her first home. There was silence. Then, Leona's voice cut in, shrill, sharp, slicing through the speaker. "So unfair, Mrs. Hale. You're playing favorites. We're married, we're trying to build something, and you just hand your daughter money like we don't exist." Her tone made my chest tighten. "This isn't a competition," I said quietly. "Oh, but it is," she snapped. "Because every time you help her, it's less for us." Adrian didn't stop her. Not once. I hung up before my anger could spill out, but that night, I sat in the dark and realized something chilling. Leona wasn't just influencing Adrian. She was reprogramming him. It became clearer with time. He started using her phrases, her tone. When I'd offer advice, he'd sigh, "Mom, not everyone wants to work themselves to death like you." When I refused a loan once, he said, "You have so much. What's a few thousand to you?" Leona would sit beside him during these conversations, silent but smiling, the kind of smile that wasn't joy, but victory. Years passed, and their visits became transactional. They'd bring gifts, expensive, hollow ones, then bring up opportunities. There was always a deal, a project, a startup that needed funding. I'd watch Leona's eyes dart to my jewelry, my car, my home. It wasn't love for Adrian that drove her. It was envy disguised as ambition. Once, I overheard her at a family barbecue whispering to her friend. I told Adrian his mom's sitting on gold and doesn't even realize it. One day it'll all be ours anyway. That day something in me cracked. Not from anger, from grief. Because my son, My sweet boy who once held my hand crossing the street was now a man whose wife saw me as an obstacle. And he was too blind to see it. Back in the present, the echoes of that realization burned hotter than ever. After that dinner, after my refusal, Leona had made a scene before leaving. "Your mother's out of touch, Adrian. She doesn't trust you." It's pathetic. He followed her, torn but silent, and the front door slammed like a period at the end of a long, bitter sentence. I sat there at the table, the candles flickering low, the food untouched. Mara came up behind me, resting her hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Mom," she whispered. "They've been using you." I looked at her, my daughter, who had asked for nothing but given everything, and I felt both sorrow and strength rise in me. "I know," I said quietly, "but now they'll finally see who I really am." Over the next few days, I heard rumors. Leona ranting to relatives, painting me as cruel and controlling. Adrian didn't stop her. But instead of breaking me, it clarified everything. I realized that money wasn't what they wanted. Control was. And my no, that one small word, had stripped them of it. That's when I made a decision. If Leona wanted to play a game, I'd show her that I'd been playing one long before she ever came into our lives. Only this time, I'd play to win. The morning after that dreadful dinner, the house felt like a graveyard. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like it had weight. Every room carried the echo of Adrian's voice, his words still hanging in the air like ghosts that refused to leave. "You've always chosen money over family." Those words, cruel, careless, sliced deeper than he would ever understand. I'd spent a lifetime choosing family over everything else. Every dollar I made, every hour I lost, every dream I buried, it was all for him. And now, somehow, I was the villain in his story. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee untouched, staring at the empty chair across from me. For years, Adrian had sat there, his laughter filling the room, his promises floating between us. Now it was just empty. Then came the soft knock at the door. "Mama." Mara's voice, gentle, familiar. The only sound that could break through the ache inside me. I opened the door and she stood there, holding a basket of muffins. The same ones I used to bake for them when they were kids. My throat tightened. "You don't have to keep bringing me food," I said, managing a small smile. "I know," she said, stepping in, "but you always forget to eat when you're upset." She knew me too well that we sat down at the table together. The sunlight poured through the window, catching the dust in the air, tiny gold flecks, floating endless. I envied them. Mara reached for my hand. "I heard what happened," she said softly. "Aunt Clara called." Of course she did. In this family, secrets traveled faster than reason. I sighed. "Let me guess, she thinks I've lost my mind for saying no?" Mara smiled sadly. "She thinks you finally grew one." That made me laugh, just for a second. The sound surprised me. Mara has always been the calm to my storm. Where Adrian was loud, impulsive, and dramatic, she was quiet, thoughtful, steady. The kind of person who listened before speaking. She inherited that from my father, not me. Her life was modest but full. She worked as a teacher, lived in a small apartment, spent weekends volunteering at a community center. No luxury cars, no grand vacations, no obsession with showing off. And yet, she glowed with something her brother never understood, contentment. I looked at her, her soft brown hair tied up, a smudge of flour on her sleeve, probably from baking those muffins. She was 36 now, but to me, she still looked like the little girl who'd sit on the bakery counter, swinging her legs, counting coins to help Mommy. "Do you remember," I asked quietly, "when your brother crashed that car I bought him?" Her eyes met mine, steady knowing. "Of course I do. You cried for days." "I didn't cry because of the car," I whispered. "I cried because he looked at me like I'd ruined his life. I gave him everything, and it made him angry." Mara nodded. "You gave him so much, Mom, he never had to grow. You gave him shortcuts when he needed lessons." Her words hurt, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. For years, I'd told myself I was being a good mother. That giving Adrian whatever he wanted was a way of protecting him. From poverty, from struggle, from the pain I knew too well. But sitting there, watching Mara sip her coffee, I realized I'd been protecting him from the one thing that makes a person whole: accountability. "You were so young when your father left," I said. "I was scared you'd both hate me for not being enough. So I overcompensated." I thought love meant saying yes. Mara set her cup down, her voice gentle but firm. "You didn't fail, Mom. You loved us the best way you knew how. But Adrian, he learned to take love like a loan. The more you gave, the more he believed he was owed." I swallowed hard. "And you? You never asked for anything." She smiled faintly. "You gave me the one thing I needed, your example. I saw how hard you worked. That was enough." Her humility cut through me like glass. How unfair it had been. One child draining me, the other quietly carrying the weight I couldn't name. We sat in silence for a long while. The kind of silence that holds truth. Finally, Mara spoke. "Mom, you don't owe Adrian anything. Not money. Not explanations. You've already given him more than most mothers ever could." "But he's my son," I said, my voice trembling. "How do I just stop caring?" "You don't stop caring," she said softly. "You just stop enabling." That word, enabling, landed heavy. I'd heard it before, but never applied it to myself. It sounded harsh, clinical. But it fit. I'd enabled Adrian's entitlement. Every time I covered for his failures, every time I paid his debts, every time I stayed silent when he disrespected me, I'd taught him that his comfort mattered more than my boundaries. And now that cycle had reached its breaking point. Mara reached across the table again. "He's not used to you saying no. That's why he's angry." "But anger isn't proof you're wrong, Mom. It's proof you changed the rules." I looked at her, tears pricking the corners of my eyes. "Do you think he'll ever forgive me?" She smiled, that sad, wise smile of hers. "Maybe. But first, he'll have to see you as a person, not a wallet." I laughed quietly. "That might take a miracle." "Or," she said, squeezing my hand, "it might just take time." After she left, I sat by the window for hours, thinking about the years that had led us here. I remembered birthdays, Adrian demanding expensive gifts, while Mara offered handmade cards. I remembered college tuition fights, late-night calls for bail money, the endless loans that were never repaid. And through it all, I remembered Mara, quietly working, saving, never once asking for help. Watching her brother be rewarded for behavior she never dared to copy. It hit me then how deeply I'd failed her, not by neglect, but by imbalance. I'd poured my energy into fixing the broken parts of one child while ignoring the steady light in the other. A few days later, Mara came back again. She found me in the bakery, kneading dough, trying to outrun my thoughts. "You look tired," she said, tying an apron around her waist. "Thinking too much," I admitted. She began helping, measuring flour, dusting sugar, like old times. The rhythm of it, the scent of bread baking, the soft clatter of trays, it grounded me. "As we worked," she said quietly, "do you ever regret building all this?" I looked around at the bakery, the walls I'd painted myself, the oven I'd saved for years to buy. "Never," I said. "But I regret forgetting who I built it for." Her eyes softened. "Then maybe it's time you remember." That night, we sat outside the bakery after closing, sharing leftover croissants. The moon hung low, the street lights flickered. For the first time in years, I felt something like peace. Mara leaned back, gazing at the stars. "Do you think Adrian will come around?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But if he does, I want him to meet the version of me who isn't afraid to say no." She nodded. "That's the mom I always saw." I turned to her. "You know, you've always been the quiet one. But you see everything, don't you?" She laughed softly. "That's my curse and my blessing." We both smiled. Because it was true. Mara had always seen what I refused to. She saw Adrian's manipulation, Leona's greed, my exhaustion, my denial. She saw the cracks long before I did. She'd been the mirror I was too afraid to look into. When she finally left that night, I stood at the doorway watching her walk to her car. And I realized something profound, something that shifted everything inside me. Mara wasn't the good child or the forgotten one. She was the proof that love doesn't have to be bought. Adrian had become a reflection of my fears. Mara had become a reflection of my strength. And standing there in the quiet glow of the streetlight, I made a silent promise. I would no longer apologize for what I'd built. I would no longer confuse love with surrender. And I would never again let guilt dictate my generosity. Because Mara was right, I didn't owe anyone my success. I'd earned it. Every bruise, every sleepless night, every tear. And if Adrian couldn't see that, then maybe losing him, for now, was the price of finally finding myself. It's strange how silence can make people nervous. After that dinner, the night I said no, I didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't chase. I simply stopped calling. And that, apparently, was my greatest crime. Because within a week, the whispers began. It started with a phone call from my cousin. Her voice was uneasy, hesitant. "Sweetheart, I just wanted to check in. Adrian told me you've been forgetting things lately." "Forgetting things?" I repeated, stunned. "He said you've been acting a little confused. That he's worried you're, well, not yourself." I nearly dropped the phone. "He said that?" "Yes," she said softly. "And Leona mentioned you've been having mood swings. She's afraid you're under too much stress running the bakery at your age." My hands trembled as I hung up. The kitchen around me blurred. For a moment, I didn't feel angry. I felt betrayed on a level that words couldn't touch. It wasn't enough that I refused him money. Now he wanted to ruin me. In the following days, I noticed the looks. At church, people smiled too sweetly. At the bakery, regulars asked gentle questions like, "Are you still managing all this on your own, dear?" And when I went to the bank one morning, the teller hesitated before handing me my statements. "Your son said he might come by soon," she said, "to help with your accounts." Help? That was when I realized Adrian and Leona weren't just gossiping. They were strategizing. I spent that evening scrolling through social media, a world I rarely visited. And there it was, their performance, polished and perfect. Photo after photo of them in expensive restaurants, sipping champagne, posing beside rented sports cars. The captions read like propaganda. "Building our dream life together, hard work pays off. Big news coming soon." Comments from relatives flooded in. "So proud of you both. Your mom must be thrilled." I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling my stomach twist. Because I knew the truth. They were drowning in debt. Their credit cards had limits. Their business ventures had flopped one after another. The money I'd once given them was long gone. Not invested, but consumed. And now, instead of taking responsibility, they were crafting a lie to hide the rot. The next wave came fast. They began calling family members one by one, claiming I was withholding Adrian's inheritance, an inheritance that didn't even exist yet. "She promised to help us," Leona said on a speakerphone call that one of my cousins secretly recorded. "But now she's keeping everything for Mara." "It's disgusting." "She's changed," Adrian added. "It's like she cares more about her money than her own family." Their voices dripped with venom. But what hurt most was how calm they sounded. Like they'd convinced themselves their version was the truth. I didn't respond. I refused to feed their fire. But silence, as I would learn, is often mistaken for guilt. The real breaking point came 2 weeks later. It was a Saturday morning. The bakery was bustling, full of the warm smell of cinnamon and laughter. Children pressed their faces against the glass, watching as I boxed cupcakes. It felt like any other day, until the doorbell chimed, and I looked up to see them. Adrian and Leona. My heart stuttered. Leona wore a bright red coat, designer handbag slung over her arm, sunglasses perched like a crown. Adrian followed behind, jaw tight, eyes cold. "Adrian," I said cautiously, "you shouldn't be here." He smiled, not the smile I raised him with, but something sharper. "Oh, I think I should." The chatter in the bakery softened, customers glancing over. My employees froze mid-task. Leona stepped forward. "We just came to clear the air," she said sweetly. "You've been spreading lies about us, haven't you?" "Excuse me. Don't play innocent," she sneered. "You told everyone we asked for money, when all we did was ask for what's rightfully Adrian's." Gasps rippled through the room. I kept my voice even. "You embarrassed yourself at my table, Leona. I don't owe you anything." "Oh, so it's true," she said louder now, her voice ringing through the bakery. "You're cutting your own son out of his inheritance." No wonder everyone says you've lost it. I saw customers exchanging looks, whispering. My hands shook, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Adrian took a step forward, voice dripping with condescension. You built all this because of me, Mom. You said you wanted to give your kids a better life. Well, congratulations. You've given one of them everything and left the other with nothing. Mara, who had been in the back, rushed out, face pale. Get out, she said, her voice trembling with fury. You have no right to talk to her like that. Leona laughed. Oh look, the golden child speaks. Adrian didn't look at Mara, his eyes were locked on me. You made me this way, he said. You taught me that money fixes everything. And now, suddenly, you want to act like you're above it. The words hit like bullets. And for a second, I almost faltered. Because he wasn't entirely wrong. I had created this entitlement. I had fed it, nurtured it, defended it. But now, standing there, in front of customers, my daughter, my employees, I felt something inside me shift. Something I'd buried for years finally rose. I took off my apron, folded it calmly, and placed it on the counter. The room was silent, waiting for my explosion. Instead, I looked at Adrian and said, softly but clearly, "Get out of my bakery." He blinked, startled. Leona smirked. Or what? I stepped closer. Or I'll remind you exactly who you're talking to. She rolled her eyes. Oh please, you're just a tired old woman. I held up a hand. You think I'm weak because I don't shout. But remember this. I built this place from flour, tears, and a dream no one believed in. You've built nothing but excuses. Her face flushed red. I turned to Adrian, my voice trembling not with fear, but finality. You say I made you this way? Maybe I did. But you're a grown man now. You choose who you become. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Leona tugged his arm, muttering, She's not worth it. As they walked out, I saw it, that flicker in Adrian's eyes. Not anger. Not victory. Shame. The door shut behind them. The bell's chime sounded like a full stop. The bakery was silent. Then, slowly, applause began, soft at first, from an older woman in line, then spreading. I didn't want it. I didn't need it. But it was healing. Mara came up behind me, tears in her eyes. You okay? I took a deep breath. I am now. Because for the first time, I wasn't running. The aftermath was messy, as revenge always is. Adrian and Leona doubled down online, calling me controlling, saying I stole from my own son. They even claimed I'd faked my will to favor Mara. But their stories started cracking. People noticed the inconsistencies, the photos that didn't match their timelines, the debts they couldn't hide forever. Within a month, one of their credit cards was frozen. Then another. They stopped posting altogether. Meanwhile, I kept working. Quietly. Purposefully. Every morning, I opened the bakery at dawn. Every evening, Mara and I closed together. There was peace in the routine, in the smell of warm bread, in the hum of life moving forward. But beneath that peace, something else had been born, resolve. Because that day in the bakery didn't just mark an ending. It was the moment I stopped being afraid of my own strength. For years, I'd confused silence with grace, patience with weakness. But now I understood walking away isn't the same as giving up. Sometimes, it's the beginning of a war you've already won. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years. My handwriting wavered at first, but the words came strong. He can ruin my name, but not my worth. He can take my money, but not my peace. I gave him life. I won't give him the power to define it. I closed the journal, exhaled, and looked around my quiet kitchen. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. I was simply done being quiet. I used to think taking control meant raising your voice. But now, I've learned it's quieter than that. A quiet so steady it rattles the people who can't stand not being in charge of you. The morning after the bakery incident, the world felt lighter. Not peaceful yet, but lighter. Like the air after a storm when the clouds are still bruised, but the sun insists on breaking through. Mara came over with coffee and that worried tilt to her brow. You sure you're okay? I nodded. I'm fine. You didn't deserve what they did. I sighed. sitting at the kitchen table. I raised him to believe love was tied to money. Maybe this is the consequence of that mistake. Mara reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You made sacrifices. That's not the same as spoiling. But I knew better. Sacrifice, when done blindly, becomes enabling. And I'd done plenty of that. Later that afternoon, while we worked side by side at the bakery, Mara looked up and said, "You know, you could protect everything you've built. Legally. Protect it from what from them?" She wiped flour off her cheek. "If Adrian and Leona ever tried something like contesting your will or claiming ownership, you'd be covered." Her words landed like a spark on dry wood. I had always avoided talking about what-ifs. It felt morbid, greedy, unmotherly. But that avoidance was how I'd ended up here. Decades of giving, forgiving, and hoping people would simply do right. People rarely do. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, old tax forms and business papers spread before me. The numbers told a story I had ignored for too long. Every loan I'd paid off, every upgrade I'd made, all in my name. The bakery was mine, built from burned hands, sleepless nights, and years of rejection. And yet, if I died tomorrow, Adrian could legally claim half of it. That thought clenched something in my chest. The next morning, I made a call, not to Adrian, not to family, but to an old friend, my accountant, Mrs. Vega. She was in her 70s now, sharp as ever, with a voice that could cut through any nonsense. "About time you called," she said. "I was wondering when you'd stop mothering and start managing." I chuckled. "I need to protect what's left. Then come in. We'll make it ironclad." Her office smelled like paper and lemon polish. We went through every document. Property deeds, business licenses, savings accounts. She asked questions I'd never thought to ask myself. Who owns the equipment? The name on the bakery lease? Who's listed as your emergency contact? By the end of the meeting, I was both exhausted and liberated. Mrs. Vegas smiled at me over her glasses. "You've done more than enough for everyone else. Now you make sure your legacy can't be rewritten by guilt." What do I do first? Transfer ownership. Set up a private trust. Put Mara in charge. And change your will. I hesitated. Won't people talk? They already are, she said dryly. Might as well give them something true to whisper about. Over the next few weeks, the shift began quietly. I didn't make grand announcements. I didn't explain myself to anyone. The trust paperwork was drawn up, giving Mara legal control over the bakery, the property, and the small home I'd paid off years ago. Every detail was airtight, notarized, sealed, witnessed. I watched Mara sign her part, her hands shaking slightly. "Mom," she whispered, "you don't have to do this." "I do," I said. "Because if anything happens to me, I want this place to go to someone who values people more than pride." Tears welled in her eyes. "You really trust me that much?" I smiled. "You've never asked for anything. That's exactly why you deserve it." When the trust was finalized, Mrs. Vega sent me a simple text. "It's done. Congratulations. You're invisible to the greedy now." Invisible. I liked that. No one needed to know that on paper, I no longer owned a thing. To the outside world, I was still the same stubborn old woman guarding her bakery. But in reality, the ownership, the accounts, even the insurance, all belonged to the trust. If Adrian ever came for me again, there would be nothing left for him to take. Still, one decision remained, the one that would define how I left the world behind one day. The will. I met with a lawyer at dusk, in a small office smelling faintly of coffee and dust. He listened patiently as I outlined my wishes. Mara would oversee everything. The bakery would continue operating under her supervision, with part of the profits donated annually to a scholarship fund for single mothers rebuilding their lives. Adrian's name never came up. Not out of hatred, out of acceptance. When the lawyer looked up and asked, "Do you wish to leave anything to your son?" I paused for a long moment. Finally, I said, "Yes, a lesson." He smiled faintly. "I'll note that in spirit." Weeks passed. Outside, people still whispered that I was being unreasonable. Family members called, asking if I'd reconsider making peace with Adrian. "Don't be so dramatic," one aunt said. "He's your son." "Yes," I said evenly. And I'm his mother, not his wallet. The gossip didn't hurt anymore. It rolled off me like rain on stone. What they didn't realize was that I'd stopped living for their approval long ago. Meanwhile, Adrian and Leona kept pretending. They hosted small gatherings, flaunting rented jewelry and fake smiles. Mutual friends would message me now and then. They say they're opening a boutique. Is it true? I'd reply simply, good for them. But inside, I knew the cracks were widening. Their success had no roots. And soon enough, everything built on deceit collapses under its own weight. One evening, Mara came home from the bakery with an envelope. Mom, the first donation cleared. She showed me the letter. The scholarship fund had been established in my name. The Clara Ansel Foundation for Single Mothers Pursuing Education. Reading those words made my throat tighten. For so many years, I'd defined myself by what I could give my children. But now, I was giving to women who understood the kind of hunger that builds character, not entitlement. It felt right. Mara smiled. This is what you should be known for. I nodded, tears blurring my vision. Maybe this is what I was meant to build all along. Later that night, I sat on the back porch, looking out at the street where my kids had once played. The air smelled of fresh bread and rain. I could hear Mara laughing with a customer as she closed up shop. And for the first time, I didn't feel fear about the future. I felt readiness. Because I knew what had to come next. A confrontation, yes, but one that would happen on my terms. I wouldn't chase him. I wouldn't yell. I'd let the truth reveal itself. Not through anger, but through absence. Let them see what happens when the person they underestimated stops playing their game. The next morning, I put on my best dress, tied my hair neatly, and looked in the mirror. For years, I'd seen a mother trying to hold a family together. Today, I saw a woman reclaiming her life. Mara noticed as I stepped out. Going somewhere? Yes, I said, my voice calm but steady. It's time Adrian learns what no really means. I didn't plan to humiliate him. Not publicly, not cruelly. That wasn't the point. I wanted him to see the full scope of what he'd thrown away. To realize that while he was out there fighting for scraps of illusion, I'd built an empire of peace beneath his radar. I was done defending myself. Now it was time to demonstrate myself. 65. I never thought I'd reach this age with a clear mind, a steady hand, and a heart that had finally learned the art of saying no. The morning of my 65th birthday began quietly. No balloons, no noise, no fake laughter. Just the warm scent of baked bread from the kitchen and the soft hum of the oven timer, the same sound that had followed me through decades of struggle. Mara had decorated the bakery's private dining room for a small dinner, a simple, elegant setting. Candles, pale yellow roses, and linen tablecloths folded with care. She knew I wasn't one for grandeur. Still, this dinner wasn't about celebration. It was about closure and confrontation. When I told Mara I wanted to invite everyone, including Adrian and Leona, she froze. Mom, are you sure that's a good idea? Yes, I said, unflinching. Let's end this on my terms. She hesitated. They'll think you're caving. That you're calling them to make peace. I smiled faintly. Good. Let them think that. Because people like Adrian and Leona only hear what benefits them. They don't listen, they interpret. And tonight, I wanted them to interpret every word I said exactly the wrong way, until it was too late. By late afternoon, the room was ready. The staff had set out the dinnerware I'd saved for special occasions, real porcelain, not the fancy imported plates Adrian once insisted were too plain for someone with your money. Mara stood beside me, adjusting the candles. Her nerves were obvious, but I was calm. Strangely calm. Are you sure you don't want to invite Aunt May or anyone else? She asked. No. This isn't for show. This is for truth. She nodded, trusting me as always. Outside, the sky was streaked with orange and violet, the kind of sunset that makes you stop and think about every mistake and miracle that brought you to this point. When Adrian and Leona arrived, they made sure everyone noticed. Leona walked in first, heels clicking like a countdown, diamonds glinting under the lights. Adrian followed, wearing a tailored suit and an expression somewhere between smug and expectant. Happy birthday, Mom, Adrian said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. The gesture was polite, hollow. Thank you. I replied evenly. Leona smiled tight. This looks lovely. Oh, you really went all out. How sweet. I smiled back. I wanted tonight to be memorable. If she'd noticed the double meaning, she didn't show it. Dinner began politely enough. Small talk floated over the clinking of forks and the soft background music Mara had chosen. Adrian filled the air with stories of new ventures and potential investors. I listened without interruption. He spoke as if reading from a script meant to impress. Leona nodded along, pretending interest, occasionally glancing at Mara with the smugness of someone convinced they've already won. So, Mom, Adrian said at last, I'm really glad you invited us. It's been tense lately. Yes, it has. He cleared his throat. I figured maybe we could start fresh. Move forward as a family. Leona added sweetly, we've all said things we regret. But family's family, right? Her tone dripped with manipulation. I smiled and set down my fork. I couldn't agree more. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Everyone sensed the shift. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I looked around the table, at the faces I'd fed, raised, and forgiven 100 times. When I was younger, I began, my voice calm but steady. I thought love meant never saying no. I believed if I gave enough, everyone would stay grateful. But I learned something over the years. Gratitude without humility is just entitlement in disguise. Adrian's expression stiffened. Leona blinked, her smile faltering. Mara glanced at me, uncertain but trusting. I continued, you all know how hard I worked. Many of you remember when this bakery was just a stall at the corner market, when my hands were cracked from kneading dough at 4 in the morning. Every dollar I earned came with blisters and tears. I took a deep breath. And I don't regret any of it. Because it taught me what matters. Leona's eyes darted toward Adrian, silently asking him to interrupt. He didn't. I looked directly at him. You once asked me for $200,000, Adrian. Do you remember? He shifted uncomfortably. Yeah. We talked about that. You said it was for your future. That I was choosing money over family. His jaw clenched. Mom. I raised my hand slightly. Let me finish. The room fell silent again. Even the background music seemed to hush. I realized that night that I'd been feeding the wrong hunger all these years. I kept trying to fill the hole left by your father's absence, and in doing so, I made you believe that love was measured in checks and gifts. But love isn't about giving what's asked for. It's about giving what's needed. Leona scoffed quietly. So this is a lecture? I turned to her slowly. No, dear. It's a reminder that what we build out of greed never lasts. What we build out of gratitude does. Adrian crossed his arms, defensive. So what's this about? Are you just trying to shame us again? No, I said softly. I'm trying to explain why I invited you. He frowned. I stood, my chair scraping lightly against the floor, and reached for the envelope beside my plate. I wanted to share my plans for the future. Since everyone's been curious about what I'll do with my business, my home, and my savings. Leona's posture changed immediately, alert, hungry. Oh, well, that's wonderful. It's about time you. Let me finish, I said again firmly. I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. I finalized my will. Everything I've built, every cent, every brick, every memory, will go to those who understood the value of earning it. You could have heard a pin drop. Adrian's face drained of color. Leona's hand froze midair, her mouth slightly open. Mara's eyes widened, but not with greed, with shock and humility. I've established the Clara Ansel Foundation, I continued. It will support single mothers who want to rebuild their lives, women who, like me, were told they'd never make it on their own. Leona's voice wavered. And what about the family? Your real family? I turned to her with a faint, knowing smile. My real family are the ones who stand beside me, not behind my wallet. Adrian pushed back his chair abruptly. So you're just cutting me out? After everything I've done for you. Everything you've taken, I corrected softly. That's different. He slammed his hand on the table. You're unbelievable. You're letting her, he pointed at Mara, take everything. Mara flinched but said nothing. I met his gaze, unblinking. No one's taking anything. I'm simply giving credit where it's due. Adrian's voice rose. You always loved her more. I shook my head slowly. No, Adrian. I just stopped mistaking your demands for love. Leona stood, her voice sharp now. This is ridiculous. You're letting bitterness control you. What kind of mother does this? The kind who finally learned to protect her peace, I said. Her lip curled. You'll regret this when you're old and alone. I already was alone, I said quietly. For years, while you both pretended to care. Mara stood up then, trembling but firm. Enough. You've done nothing but use her. You've lied to everyone, drained her kindness, and made her feel guilty for wanting boundaries. Adrian glared at her. You think you're better than me? She met his eyes evenly. No. Just wiser. He laughed bitterly. You'll see. She'll turn on you too, once she realizes. She won't, I interrupted. Because I built this foundation with her. Every paper's signed. Every transfer's done. Leona's face twisted. You can't do that. You can't just. I already did, I said simply. Silence. For a long, fragile moment, no one spoke. Then Adrian grabbed his coat, muttering curses under his breath. You've lost your mind. Enjoy your little empire. Leona followed, tears of anger brimming in her eyes. You'll regret humiliating us like this. The door slammed behind them, rattling the dishes on the table. Mara looked at me shaken. Mom, that was necessary, I finished for her. The room was quiet again, but not heavy. I sank back into my chair, exhaling deeply. The weight I'd carried for decades seemed to lift off me in that single moment. Mara came around the table and hugged me tightly. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, I whispered. Just promise me one thing. She pulled back. What's that? Don't ever let guilt disguise itself as love. It's the most expensive lie a parent can buy. As the candles burned low, I looked around the table, the plates half empty, the glasses glinting in dim light. It wasn't the celebration most would expect for a 65th birthday. But it was exactly what I needed. Truth, peace, and finality. Through the bakery window, I could see the night sky open up, the first stars blinking quietly above the city. I had given my children everything, but tonight, I gave myself something far rarer. Freedom. And for the first time in decades, I felt young again. The days following that unforgettable birthday dinner were eerily quiet. For the first time in years, my phone didn't buzz with Adrian's name lighting up the screen. No texts. No guilt-laden messages. No angry voicemails. Just silence. It was the kind of silence that pressed on your chest like weight. But I didn't crumble this time. I knew what that silence meant. The shock, the rage, the humiliation. The empire of entitlement I had built for my son had finally collapsed, and the dust was settling. 3 days later, my neighbor Mrs. Lang came into the bakery, holding her phone out. Have you seen this? She whispered. On the screen was Leona, streaming live from what looked like a nearly empty apartment. Her makeup was streaked, her voice shrill. I gave everything to that family. I put up with his old hag of a mother, and this is how she repays us? She's cursed. That woman's cursed. In the background, I caught sight of Adrian, pacing, head in his hands. His eyes were hollow, the arrogance gone. Mrs. Lang glanced at me, expecting a reaction. But I just wiped the counter and said quietly, maybe it's time he learns how to clean up his own mess. It wasn't cruelty. It was release. That night, Mara came over, her presence calm as always. She made us tea and sat with me on the porch as the sun melted into the horizon. You did the right thing, she said softly. You gave him everything you could, but now you're giving him what he truly needs, accountability. I smiled faintly. Do you know what hurts most? I don't even miss him right now. I just miss the boy he used to be. The one who'd wait for me to come home from the bakery, just to show me a drawing he made. Mara took my hand. He's still in there somewhere, Mom. But you can't rescue him. He has to find his own way out. Her words echoed in the quiet, and I knew she was right. The best kind of love isn't about shielding. It's about allowing someone to face their own storm. Within a week, whispers spread through town. Adrian and Leona's luxury apartment lease had been terminated. Their new car, repossessed. The once perfect image they'd crafted online began to unravel. Leona's friends stopped answering her calls. Her social media went dark. Adrian's old buddies, the ones who only showed up when he was paying for the drinks, disappeared too. I found out through a mutual acquaintance that Adrian had started sleeping on a friend's couch. Leona had gone back to her mother's house, blaming him for marrying into poverty. The poetic irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Adrian had blamed me for holding him back. Now he was facing the consequences of chasing easy wealth and shallow approval. Still, every time I passed his old room, the trophies gathering dust, the posters peeling off, I felt the ache. Love doesn't vanish with disappointment. It lingers, bruised but alive. 2 weeks later, the bell over the bakery door chimed, and there he was. Adrian. He looked nothing like the man who had humiliated me in front of my customers weeks ago. His hair was unkempt, his clothes wrinkled, and his eyes, those bright, confident eyes, were tired, almost frightened. "Mom," he said quietly. The bakery went silent. Even the air seemed to pause. I motioned toward the back room. He followed, shoulders slumped. We sat at the small wooden table that had seen years of late-night bookkeeping and birthday cake orders. He took a deep breath. "I messed up. I know. Leona's gone. She took what was left of our savings. I just wanted to make you proud." His voice cracked on the last word. For a brief moment, I saw my little boy again. "You don't need to make me proud, Adrian," I said softly. "You just need to grow up." He looked down. "I don't know where to start." I hesitated, then slid a small card across the table. "Start here. I'll give you a job part-time at the bakery. No special treatment. Minimum wage. You learn, you earn. That's the offer." His head shot up. "A job? You want me to work here? With everyone watching?" "Yes," I said simply. "If you want a clean slate, you start where you lost yourself." He scoffed, the old pride flickering back. "You'd rather see me behind that counter than help me rebuild my business? You really think scrubbing pans is going to fix anything?" I met his glare steadily. It fixed me. For a moment, we just stared at each other, 2 generations of stubbornness colliding. Finally, he stood, shaking his head. "You've changed." "No," I replied. I finally stopped pretending I hadn't. He left without another word. The bell rang again as the door closed behind him, and I felt something inside me break, but not in the old, weak way. This time, it was a breaking open. Days turned into weeks. The stool near the counter, the one Adrian used to sit on as a child, swinging his legs, stayed empty. But I didn't fill it with guilt anymore. Instead, I filled my days with purpose. The bakery was thriving again. Mara was managing new charity programs through our foundation, offering scholarships to single mothers who wanted to start their own small businesses. One afternoon, as I handed a young woman her first grant check, she hugged me and whispered, "You're giving me a chance no one ever gave my mom." I smiled, because that's what legacy truly meant. Not inheritance. Impact. That a month later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Handwritten, messy, familiar. "Mom," it began. "I've been working odd jobs. It's not much, but it's honest. You were right. I needed to learn how it feels to earn something with my own hands. I'm not asking for money. I just wanted you to know I'm trying. If the offer still stands, maybe I can start at the bakery. I think I finally understand what you meant." Adrian. Tears blurred the ink as I read. It wasn't victory I felt. It was peace, the quiet kind that comes when you finally see your child finding their footing, even if it took losing everything first. The next morning, I left the back door of the bakery unlocked. By noon, I heard it, the faint creak of the door, the soft sound of footsteps, the scent of humility mixing with the warm aroma of rising dough. Adrian stood there, apron in hand, unsure but ready. I handed him a tray of pastries and simply said, "We open at 9. He nodded. No grand apologies. No promises. Just quiet effort. Sometimes redemption doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with flour on your hands and sweat on your brow. As I watched him serve his first customer, awkwardly but earnestly, I thought about all the years I had spent chasing the illusion of love through giving. Now, I finally understood that love isn't proven by how much you give, but by how well you let someone grow. The fallout wasn't an ending. It was a cleansing. And as the bakery filled with laughter, clinking cups, and the smell of fresh bread, I realized, sometimes losing everything is the only way to truly start over. It had been nearly a year since the storm, since the night I refused to give Adrian that $200,000 and, unknowingly, triggered the unraveling of everything we'd built and broken as a family. But now, my days began differently. I woke up to the scent of warm bread and the quiet hum of a thriving business, when I no longer managed alone. The world I had once carried on my back was now in steady, capable hands. Mara's hands. The bakery had grown, not just in profit, but in purpose. And for the first time in decades, peace didn't feel like a luxury. It felt like my life. The main bakery had transformed into something almost unrecognizable. It was still the same cozy space, the same brick walls, the same old wooden tables. But now there was a rhythm to it. A steady flow. Mara managed everything with the precision of someone who understood both business and heart. She was calm where I had once been frantic. She spoke gently to employees but commanded respect in every decision. Every morning, I sat by the window with my tea, watching her guide the younger bakers through the day's orders. There was laughter now, the kind that used to fade beneath exhaustion and debt. Sometimes, customers would look over and whisper, "That's her, the woman who started it all." And I would smile politely, though I knew what I had really started wasn't just a bakery. It was a second chance. For myself. For others. When I had first transferred my savings into the trust and the scholarship fund for single mothers, many thought I was being sentimental, but Mara had turned that dream into something real. The Earn, Not Take Foundation had already funded 32 women. There was Maria, who opened a small catering business to support her 3 children. There was Nyla, who had left an abusive marriage and found healing in baking. And there was young Amira, barely 21, who reminded me so much of myself when I started out, nervous but determined. Mara kept every recipient's photo in a scrapbook, each story handwritten beside it. One evening, as I flipped through the pages, she said quietly, "Every time we help someone start over, I feel like we're rewriting our own family story." She was right. For years, our family had revolved around taking, pleasing, and overgiving. But now, we were building something that gave back, without expectation, without guilt. News of Adrian came in fragments, whispers from mutual acquaintances, the occasional mention from old family friends. He had tried to launch another business. It failed. He moved cities, took loans, and burned bridges faster than he could build them. Leona, I heard, had married again, this time to someone older, wealthier, and far less patient. Adrian was on his own now. The first time I saw him after the bakery visit months ago, he was thinner, older, quieter. He didn't make eye contact. He just walked past me in the grocery store, pretending to be busy reading the back of a cereal box. I wanted to reach out to say I'm proud you're trying or I miss you, but I didn't. Not out of anger, but out of understanding. He wasn't ready yet. Sometimes, love means waiting on the sidelines while someone learns to crawl again. It was early spring when Mara decided to open a new branch of the bakery across town, smaller, simpler, meant for the working-class neighborhoods where dreams were still baking quietly in the background. She called it Hearth and Hope. I loved the name. It reminded me of the nights when Adrian and Mara were little, when I'd stretch every dollar, bake through midnight, and still manage to make pancakes for breakfast before school. Those were the years when warmth mattered more than wealth. The grand opening was small but beautiful. Banners in soft gold, a ribbon cut with trembling hands, and a plaque on the wall that read, "For those who earn, not take," in honor of the woman who built her dreams from flour and faith. When Mara unveiled it, I felt a lump rise in my throat. I didn't cry, though. Not because I wasn't moved, but because the peace I felt was too deep for tears. I never imagined that years of pain would turn into something this pure. Meanwhile, across town, Adrian was living in a 1-bedroom apartment above a mechanic's shop. He was working as a delivery driver, minimum wage, long hours, the kind of job that didn't let you hide behind appearances. Every morning, he'd pull on the same faded jacket and remind himself not to think about what used to be. Not to think about Leona, or the luxury condo, or the nights he and his mother had dined in silence at expensive restaurants she'd paid for. But sometimes, when he passed a bakery, the smell of fresh bread stopped him cold. He told himself it didn't matter, that he was past all that. But deep down, he missed the noise, the warmth, the smell of cinnamon rolls that once meant home. He didn't know that Mara had opened a new branch just 2 blocks from his route. Not until one late afternoon, when it started to rain. He'd been delivering orders all day, soaked, exhausted, his phone dying. The last address on his list brought him to a familiar scent before he even looked up. That smell. Vanilla. Yeast. Sugar. The smell of her. He blinked through the drizzle and stared at the sign above the window. Hearth and Hope. Through the glass, he saw warm lights, smiling faces, people laughing over coffee. For a moment, he thought it was some cruel trick of nostalgia. Then his gaze landed on the wall near the counter. A framed portrait, his mother, standing in front of her first bakery, smiling with the kind of quiet strength he used to take for granted. Beneath it, a plaque engraved with the words that hit him like a punch to the chest. For those who earn, not take. His throat tightened. His knees felt weak. He stepped inside, just to see it closer. The bell chimed softly, just like it had at her bakery years ago. Mara wasn't there, but the staff greeted him warmly. He stood frozen in front of the portrait, staring at his mother's face, the gentle pride in her eyes, the kind he'd once mistaken for weakness. He whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom," but the sound barely left his lips. The young cashier looked over. "Are you okay, sir?" He nodded, blinking fast. "Yeah. I just knew her." She smiled. Everyone here does, in a way. And that was it, the moment the wall he'd built around himself finally cracked. Right there, surrounded by strangers who respected the woman he had wronged, Adrian broke down. Quietly, but completely. No cameras, no audience. Just a man, humbled by the echo of what he'd lost. Later that evening, Mara arrived at the branch to check in. The young cashier mentioned the strange man who had come by and stood crying in front of the portrait. Mara knew instantly. She didn't chase him. She didn't tell me either. She just looked up at the photo of me on the wall and whispered. He saw it. That's enough for now. She understood that some lessons don't need witnesses. Sometimes, realizing the truth is punishment enough, and healing begins in silence. Weeks passed, and one morning, a letter arrived addressed to me in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. It read, "Mom, I walked into one of your bakeries today. I didn't plan to. It just happened. I saw your picture." The words under it, they broke me. You were right. I took everything, your time, your sacrifices, your kindness, and turned them into debts you never owed. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know I'm trying to be the kind of man you raised me to be, not the one I became. Adrian. I read it twice, then pressed the paper to my chest. Forgiveness isn't always spoken. Sometimes, it's simply letting the heart unclench after years of holding on too tight. That night, I baked a batch of cinnamon rolls, his favorite, and set one aside. Just one. The next morning, I left it on the counter of Hearth and Hope with a note. For the one who finally learned to earn. Months later, Adrian showed up at the bakery again. This time clean-shaven, steady, and different. He didn't come to ask for money. He came to volunteer. Mara welcomed him without a word. He worked quietly, washing dishes, sweeping floors, learning again from the bottom up, the same place I'd once started. When I saw him from across the room, he looked up and smiled, a small, hesitant smile that carried years of regret and relief. I smiled back. For the first time in decades, there were no debts, no manipulation, no anger, just understanding. The circle had closed. That evening, as the bakery closed and the scent of bread lingered in the air, I sat with Mara and Adrian by the window. No words were needed. The past had already spoken for itself. I looked out at the fading sunlight, the world moving quietly beyond the glass, and thought, maybe this is what healing looks like. Not perfect, not neat, but whole. I had built my life from scratch, with flour, faith, and the stubborn belief that love could survive even the worst storms. And as I watched my children, one grounded, one redeemed, I whispered to myself. For those who earn, not take. And for the first time in a long, long while, my heart was finally at rest.